All right, and it looks like we are live. Welcome, everyone, to another Community Office Hours. Today, we'll be talking to the Terraform Plugin SDK group, and should be a lot of fun. I have quite a few introductions to make, but really first want to share with all of you our community guidelines. And what these simplify down to are please be excellent to one another. We like to have fun here on our community office hours and love it when everyone can engage with one another in a respectful, kind, and positive way. So please feel free to check out this link, HashiCorp.com community guidelines, if you have any other questions or if you want to look at those a little bit more deeply. So with that, would love to get to introductions. My name is Taylor Dolezal. I typically work within the Terraform and Waypoint spaces, but mostly I'm concerned on things, infrastructure, and how to put your apps together, how to ship them. Anytime you have a conversation like that, that's one that I want to be a part of. I would like to introduce everyone to Cole Morrison, who has joined our developer advocate team. He is focused on Terraform, and Cole, would love to give you the chance to, give a shout out, give your elevator pitch of who are you.
Nice. Yeah. Well, my name is Cole Morrison, and as Taylor said, I am one of the new developer advocates, and I'm going to be focusing on Terraform. So I'm basically just saying what he said, but that was all I had planned to say. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, welcome, Cole. It should be a fun one today. Hopefully, I promise to keep it light on the puns, but we never know what will happen.
Don't go light. don't do that.
Would love to introduce Brian Flad from the provider team as well. Brian, would you love to give a intro as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, my name is Brian Flad. I'm based out of the East Coast of the US, Philadelphia to be more precise. But yeah, I've been at HashiCorp for about 3.5 years. Was working on the AWS provider team previously and have recently slotted over to join Patty's team, the SDK team. So very excited to be here and very excited to chat with everyone.
Grateful to have you. It's going to be fun, kind of getting through some of these questions and getting more insights today. And I would love to welcome Patty Carver back to the stream. Patty has been a regular and just honestly so much fun to talk to. Patty, I love all of the background and stories and just kind of all of the things that you have learned and know about Terraform and building with Terraform. Are there any other fun things that you'd like to share with the group or give intros to give?
I don't think so. That was a very kind intro you gave me already. But yeah, my name is Patty Carver. I use he, him pronouns. I'm on the west coast of the US. I live in Pasco, Washington. So opposite end of the country from Brian there. Yeah, Brian, love to have Brian on the team. It's great having him here. But yeah, I'm mostly going to just try and sit back and make Brian deal with all your hard questions today instead. But thanks again for having me back.
Glad to have you. Well, awesome. Well, to start you off, I don't think that we'll have any gotcha journalism, Brian, but maybe we can come up with some questions to simulate that feel. But awesome. I think the first question that I have for you is for people that are newer to the project, either just getting started with Terraform, just getting started with writing providers. Can you tell us a little bit about what the SDK, what the SDK is and how people might go about using it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to make sure that we're all clear here, it's like, if you're a Terraform person who is, running applies and doing those things, we consider you like a practitioner, right? You're building configurations, you're running Terraform in all kinds of great environments. And the SDK kind of lives more behind the scenes of what you're doing in Terraform. This is more designed for the developers behind the scenes that can make Terraform kind of do this magic of talking to AWS or talking to other cloud providers and talking to various services that people come up with. And yeah, the SDK is really kind of there and designed to sit between, the providers who want to say, I want to make my service available within Terraform as a resource or data source, and making that experience much more plausible and much more pleasant than just, oh, hey, here's this random thing that may or may not be easy to understand how to interface with. Terraform core itself, or Terraform CLI, it's got a lot of technical details that the SDK is really designed to help smooth over from a development experience. So really, that's what like the SDK is sitting there for. And we're hoping that, over time, as we learn more and more about like what people are looking to do with Terraform and make that experience much better.
Yeah,
it's no, go ahead, Cole.
I was just gonna ask to follow up on that, Brian. So we have our service here, something like GitHub or AWS, and then we also have Terraform Core, which is the heart and soul. The plugin SDK and all of its magic fits in between. So what does it take care of for me if I'm like, all right, I've got my awesome API here and I'm going to go and try and link these up so I can write it in beautiful HTML. Like, what exactly does the plugin SDK take care of for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest, most important things is first, it needs a way for Terraform to know how to install it and basically start up the plugin. So that's something that the SDK takes care of for automatically. That's like a low level detail that most people don't care once they just want something running, right? The real more important meaty bits of the Terraform plugin SDK really gets into like how you design resources. So when you go in your Terraform configuration, you put resource, time static, for example, there's something that has to listen there and understand, oh, what does that mean? And then what does that actually translate into Terraform conceptually? So Terraform itself can really be thought, it's, the more technical side of things is like it's a graph, and each of these graph nodes represents operations that occur with different services and whatnot. From a provider developer experience, we kind of smooth over that and say, okay, what are the most important things that we need to do as what we call a managed resource, right? We're worried about, okay, how do I create such a thing? And there's a hook in there when you're developing a plugin that says, okay, I'm creating a resource, here's its name, here's the create function. And then the same thing for rereading that information, and the same thing for updating, and the same thing for deleting. And what all that is really hiding behind is like taking away that complexity of needing to understand how the graph of Terraform behind the scenes is actually interacting with you, and saying, okay, what's this boil down to from my side of the equation here, right? What equivalates to creating a thing in my service? And basically, when you're writing Terraform plugin code like that, it's basically you're just mapping your creation methods in whatever service you're using to whatever Terraform would understand. And basically, the SDK at that point really just boils down to, okay, how do I take what configuration things were passed in, which can be referred to as a configuration or sometimes a prior state, and taking that information, making it easier to consume, to pass through to your API, and then taking that API information and converting it back into something that Terraform Core understands. And that's where the SDK really sits in, if that makes sense.
Beautiful. That was a great answer. Thank you. I like the full journey from the beginning of Core to the service and the translation it does, and how it just sort of generalizes whatever it is, so that whatever type of service that you're working with gets pulled into Terraform kind of in the same pattern.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the nice thing that the SDK is also doing in this case is it allows you to test everything that you're doing. So just like interacting with a Terraform configuration, you can actually write testing that verifies basically that your create actually did reach out to whatever API or mocked API and actually created whatever you were trying to create, and you can verify that. And it goes through the testing framework goes through the whole life cycle: create, read, update, delete. So you just give it basically a number of configurations, 1, 2, 3, and first one it'll create, second one might be an update, and then the third one might be another update, and then it might delete. After all of this, it verifies that it can delete things as well. So these are all just helpers that are kind of built into the SDK to make provider development experience much easier.
Love it.
So on that front, can you tell us a little bit what's going on with the Terraform plugin framework?
Yeah. So we recently announced that there's actually going to be like a newer framework that's being developed, kind of the next generation of what Terraform provider developers might be looking at in the future. It's currently named Terraform Plugin Framework, just to give it a nice place to live and talk about separately from the current SDK. But really what this newer framework is here to do is kind of catch up the SDK side of things with new enhancements that occurred in Terraform CLI. For example, Terraform CLI added the concept of null types and these sorts of things, basically configurations that don't exist. And previously in Terraform, under the hood, there was actually no such concept in that. So the SDK was kind of developed with that in mind of, hey, if I have a string, it might be an empty string, but we don't know if that's an empty string because it's actually not there or an empty string because it's actually an empty string. And this prevents a huge amount of problems for some folks, right? Depending on the APIs that you're talking to, may or may not map nicely to that concept and may require workarounds. So, you know, this new framework is taking like a fresh look at how can we introduce this, you know, better typing system into the SDK so plugin developers have a much better experience with it, but also taking a look at it more holistically and saying, okay, if we could have changed some things, you know, that were done basically 5, 6, 7 years ago in the Terraform plugin SDK, because that's how it's old. It's as old as Terraform is, basically. What would we potentially change to make it a little bit better? And some of those things kind of relate to like Go code practices, for example. You know, using interface types and those sorts of things where you have to do type assertions is a little bit hard to understand if you're not familiar with Go coding in general. So we're also taking a look at like how can we kind of smooth over that experience. So you're actually working with real concrete Go types and everything's more statically compiled in the provider. And you're not kind of guessing like, oh, will this work or not work until I actually run the code in an acceptance test or in the real world, basically.
I feel like that's really helpful, and I'm really appreciative of, you know, the fact that the team is taking that on and making it easier to go about building these things. It's not when you hear I feel empty inside, you know, and it refers to your Go code, that's not good. And so it's nice to have that more declaratively called out. So very happy about that one.
So out of all of the big smoothing and improvements you guys have done, what's been your favorite? What has been like you guys shipped that and you're like, the world's a better place now?
For fun, I actually want to pass this one over to Patty because I think Patty's going to have the most insight to answering this the best, and probably will tell a funny story along the way. No pressure.
Oh no, I don't know that I've got a funny story for this one, but I think my pick is one of our teammates, Katie, came up with this idea called Katie State. And we called it, I guess this is my funny anecdote, is we call it Katie State internally because we were trying to figure out how to get access to the data that comes over from Terraform, because Terraform's got its own type system, like Ryan mentioned, and it's built on top of it. And we're trying to give access to that through Go, and Go wants you to do everything in its type system. And once you start working with a separate type system built on top of Go's type system, you lose all of your compiler advantages of that. And so it's a lot of type assertions. It's a lot of losing compiler checking. And we were like, how can we make this better? How can we fix this? And it was a problem we really struggled with because a lot of Terraform provider developers know right now resource data, getting data out of resource data is a thing that if you don't see it tested, you're not sure it works because you've got to type assert on things. And if you type assert the wrong type on something, it'll panic at runtime and that's like things will crash. It's just bad. And we knew we wanted to fix this. We knew we wanted this to be one of the core things that we improved on for the framework. And so we built prototypes for it and we tried different things out and we kind of played with the problem for a really long time, actually. We spent a lot of time and built a lot of prototypes on this. And we eventually, Katie proposed in a meeting, and I remember the meeting it happened, proposed this approach. And I looked at her and I was like, I think that might work. I think that actually might be what we're looking at, could be the best we can do on this. As with the tools we have today. And so we jokingly started calling it Katie State because that's what she named the type in her prototype. Because we had 5 or 6 prototypes flying around at this point. And so we started naming types, just different things so we could tell them apart. And Katie State is what she named it. So we've been joking that we're going to ship it, calling it Katie State at this point, because we've been referring to Katie State for so long. But I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about it because I think we got to something that allows provider developers to deal with abstractions at the level that they want abstractions to be at. And so you can work with null and unknown values and all these other things that we're introducing, if that's something that's important to you. But if you don't care about that, you can just go directly to Go types with it and not have to worry about any of that at all. But we're also offering ways to get the entire state or configure plan out and into a struct at like the beginning of your function, meaning that every access that you do on it at that point is statically compiled, is type checked, is compiler assisted. And I think that's, I built a test provider with it. Like as we were building the framework out, I was kind of playing around with a test provider to see how all these ideas were working out in practice. And it's just really nice to not have all of these resource data.get and then type assertions and then calling helper methods where we expand out things and flatten things down and all of that. And I got to fix the thing that I've seen trip so many provider developers up, where if you call resource data.setID and pass in an empty string, it removes the resource from state. And a lot of people will pass in a value directly from an API, and then they will typo it in their client or something like that, and it'll be an empty string, and the resource gets removed from state, and nobody understands what's happening or why this is, and everyone loses 20 minutes debugging it. And so now in the framework, because we're using this Katie state abstraction, we've got an explicit remove from state method on the state method that I'm really excited about, because it just makes an entire class of errors that provider developers had to deal with go away. And I think that's really cool. But yeah, did I satisfy your craving for a story there, Brian?
Yes.
Did I do okay?
That big fix then was removing a lot of the friction that happens between different types when you're moving through the pipeline of developing a plugin. And then also it seems like that was sort of at the center of a bunch of other related issues, both, just quality of life ones and just development workflow. So
yeah, I mean, I can speak from my experience, especially working on the AWS provider, is that, as more and more, newer folks were coming on onboarding and contributing, one of the hardest things to explain was, how do you test all of these type assertions and all these things? And it basically meant that you had to test every possible configuration to make sure you were doing things correctly and making Go's runtime happy, when it actually ran, which is a little scary. It's one of those, you want everything to work perfectly, but then it's, okay, like it looks 90% done. It looks right. All right. And then you go and ship it, and then, oh, somebody hits that edge case, and it's just like, okay, sorry about that. Like, and it's so nice to think about the future where that won't be possible anymore, or at least less likely. Patty, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it'll be pretty impossible to do that. And yeah, it'll be so nice.
I think if you try really hard and aim very carefully, you might be able to shoot yourself in the foot still. But it's a little bit, we made it a little bit more difficult. And yeah, I think it's really neat. But also I've got another story for you. Back in the day, back in like 2017, we actually had a GitHub bot whose one of their responsibilities was to notify us in Slack anytime anyone opened an issue with a panic in it, because that was a problem we were seeing enough that we needed that automation to get notified of it so we could go fix it, because that meant we had a type assertion wrong somewhere. And so I'm really glad that we can finally kind of reduce that error class. So it's not
fun fact, that is no longer active anymore. So please don't submit panic reports, because they're not going to our Slack anymore.
I do like that. Whenever I hear panic, I either think of the that one company that I think they've got a video game system out now, but inadvertent product placement. Sorry, but I thought that was pretty cool. I'd use them a lot for like my SFTP clients and things like that. But yeah, usually I don't usually equate it hearing Go code, but and it sounds like I won't either for some time. So I'm very happy about that.
Unless you really want to, and you aim really low.
I mean, there's also band names with that, and it's in their name too. So
that's right. That's right. I wish I could play it for you. I wish we bought the rights for that song, but alas, here we are.
When I was
maybe we could play that when the code does hit that error. Maybe we could do that.
I'll work on it. I'll get that integration set up. When I was demoing the bot to the rest of the company, because we did an all hands event, and they had me show off the bot, and kind of this was the first behavior I built and the one that we demoed. I had a panic that was a test panic, and like 30 seconds before I shared my screen, everyone's like, brace for the Panic at the Disco puns, and I was like, y'all, at least let me get to the punchline.
It's so sad when you can't have the own punchline to your own joke, but been there, done that. It's so funny. When it comes to future versions of the plugin SDK, are there any thoughts that you have about things like that? Honestly, what you're telling us is just absolutely incredible and amazing. Nice to know that we have these better guardrails in place to protect us from ourselves. Think of another song. And are there any things that you have planned for the future that really have you intrigued or excited to work on?
Yeah, so we're talking about Terraform plugin framework, which is mainly designed around the code side of everything, right? But there's different aspects to Terraform providers as well. One side of it being the acceptance testing framework that we call it, or just the testing framework. And later this year, in the next few months, we're taking a fresh new look at that and making sure that what we have as the experience actually makes the most sense. Are there anything that, in the same way we can take a fresh look at and say, this is a problematic for provider developers, or this is great for provider developers, we'll keep that, and taking a fresh look at those sorts of things. Another side of that is also just the documentation that gets created with Terraform plugins as well. So we have some light tooling that exists today that can kind of help automate some of the processes involved with documenting plugin creation and how that shows up on the registry and everything. And that's another project that once we get through more of this code side of things, we'll start taking a look at the documentation automation as well, and trying to make that experience better as well. So two very exciting things. They're all like massive projects for us. But very exciting that we have this opportunity and are executing on this to basically take a fresh look at everything and make sure that we're basically building like the SDK that can last 5, 10 years, whatever it needs to do.
The documentation thing, that is incredible to know that you guys are taking more strides. What exactly are you guys trying to accomplish with it in the future? Because I know I've seen what it can do, but what are you guys looking to make it become?
Yeah, sure. So what we're kind of alluding to here, but not actually explicitly calling out, is talking about Terraform plugin docs, that tool. And that tool currently is able to handle some of the cases that basically allow you to write a Terraform provider and with kind of low touch or medium touch automatically generate all of the documentation for that provider. So that includes like, making sure that every resource has a file, and that resource file has all the schema attributes and nested attributes and talks about its types and has hooks in for customizing bits. And a lot of that experience just needs to still just be brought up to like supportable by the whole ecosystem. So there's some corner cases today where it's not possible to implement the tool currently, just because it's missing a little pieces of functionality here and there that would, basically tie the bow up on it. So we're hoping that, we can put on our shoes and tie the bows and, make that, lace up for the race, if we will.
Yeah, that's a huge time saver in place, as it is already, but as it even gets even better, it's going to not only be a time saver for the poor developer that's like, all right, I got to document this now, but also for the other developers on the other side that have to read it.
Yeah, I mean, we're really hoping that it is that you can focus on worrying about the code and, also the testing, of course, of that code, but the documentation should really, hopefully in the future be a lot more just kind of a background thing. Oh, I just run some sort of generation command and it's now in the format that the Terraform registry wants and supports and looks great and has the hooks customizations that I might want in certain cases.
If I can jump in and add something to that as well. Some of the works we're doing on the docs generation is not happening inside the docs repo itself. A lot of the stuff we're doing with plugin framework kind of feeds into that a little bit as we're designing features and talking about how developers interact with things, talking about how documentation for those things is getting produced. So for example, we're talking about, how we're going to validate for resources and stuff and how providers will specify validation for us. And part of that conversation includes, and how do we document those validation rules for the docs, and how can we generate that documentation for inclusion in our generated docs.
Excellent. I did see a comment come in that I really wanted to take the time to expand upon a little bit, and that was this person says, docs should be written by new people in the ecosystem that ask the right questions to those who know the answers. In my opinion, docs can always be improved. Absolutely agree with the docs always being able to be improved. And I was curious on both of, all of y'all's thoughts in terms of hearing what you think about that documentation and what are some of the best perspectives to have. I just read a really good thread this week talking about principal level engineers, staff level engineers, and how good teams kind of make them like, they're like, I'm just a janitor. What do you need done? Do you need me to take this away for you? Do you want me to document this better? How can I enable you to develop the best code possible? And kind of like, instead of being like, oh, that's beneath me, having a different perspective and being like, how can I help you? Like, how do we make this ship faster, easier, and more fun to use? What are your thoughts on docs and what perspectives are helpful?
Yeah, so I think I can talk about this from two separate perspectives, right? One, there's hey, I'm a provider developer. How do I get started with the Terraform Plugin SDK or writing plugins against Terraform? That documentation for sure is like on our radar for the next few weeks actually to take a peek at and enhance them. There was semi-recently, maybe it's been around for a lot longer than I actually knew, but the Learn platform, learn.hashicorp.com, has a course on writing a custom Terraform provider, and it actually walks you through the steps of like, how do I set up my repository, and how do I get this magical Go code to do magical things with unicorns? And it's kind of that helpful walkthrough and first steps to getting in there. But once you're in there, something that's kind of interesting that we've learned over time, and Patty, I'm sure, can talk about this much more at length, but is trying to understand the design decisions that kind of went into the SDK itself and how the code kind of evolved into what it was and what it does. And we found that was pretty important to actually document what our design rationale was behind certain decisions that we're making, especially in the new framework as we're developing it, so that people can come back and say, oh, this makes more sense of like, why didn't you do something a certain way? Oh, okay, I understand that there's these trade-offs that occurred, and this happened to be the option that we went with in those certain situations. The other side of this that I can actually talk to about is, from actual like being a practitioner of Terraform and writing those Terraform configurations and running them. What we found in a lot of cases, at least when I was working on the AWS provider, is that Terraform has some certain level of nuance to it. It's kind of the way that it operates and how values kind of get passed around between the API and the Terraform state through the providers and everything, sometimes introduces a little bit of nuance that actually made more sense to have its own kind of customized Terraform documentation for an attribute or a value or something, versus just straight copy pasting what the API documentation said, for example. There's plenty of cases where in Terraform, you need to do X, and then all of a sudden it might be mystical and magic if you're not used to it, that it's going to do some behaviors behind the scenes. So documenting those cases where they're Terraform specific was like a hugely successful thing we did from the provider development side, of just making sure that we called out the certain like Terraform specific behaviors in the provider documentation. So it is kind of interesting in that sense of like, it's like, as much as we want, Terraform, providers or Terraform plugins to basically be one-to-one mappings of just APIs to Terraform operations, sometimes there's a little bit extra nuance to it. And those documentation improvements in those, a lot of cases, were actually really helpful from the community, because we heard it so many times at conferences, talking to people in various places about, hey, if I want to understand this new thing and this new API, for example, I look at the Terraform docs first for it, because they're actually slightly more clear than some of the other documentations from the vendors directly. So it's kind of interesting, how sometimes this actually plays out in that sense.
I think to follow up on that too, are there any like getting to work with you and just kind of, meet, learn and talk with you in working with the AWS provider, a very small project, just a couple million downloads. Are there any perspectives that you feel like you gained while working on that provider that you were able to take into the SDK and kind of like bring that experience into the team, or kind of shine some light on things that might not have been brought to that project before?
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, coming over, one of the biggest things that I guess I, experientially, was having such a large contributor base, which was amazing. It did present some problems of like making sure it was well cultivated and, making sure folks, contributions were well respected in a lot of cases. But trying to impart that necessity of making the development experience much easier, so it's a lot easier for not only the people creating the code who might be new at it or never seen Terraform Go code behind the scenes, but also for the reviewers as well, and working towards like automating some of those processes to make those reviews much quicker. These problems that we talked about earlier today with like type assertions and like these underlying like code kind of bugs that sometimes crop up, those were all issues that kind of required a little bit of hand-eye coordination, if you will, to just make sure that, okay, yes, like I'm thinking about this structure the right way, or it looks like they're implementing the code in a consistent manner that looks like it should do the right thing. Of course, we're running all the tests as well, but the unknown unknowns, right? So basically finding ways that we could like make the code more consistent and make it more testable and automate the review process was also like a thing that was kind of important for me to bring with me. So that's why I like love having like the support from like being on Patty's team, where it's like, hey, we can talk about how we can get these things in there and how we can make that more possible. So very exciting stuff, hopefully in the future for that.
That's awesome. Wonderful answer. Wonderful answer. Were there any questions that you had, Cole, or do you see anything in chat?
Yeah, I'd like to get Patty's view on the documentation side of things, just how he feels about it, just sort of answering the same cue that Brian did.
Absolutely. So I've got complicated and nuanced views on documentation. I originally went to college to be an English teacher. So a lot of the education research that I did during my college years kind of comes back to haunt me now that I've got to teach people about how to write Terraform providers for a living. Like that's fundamentally what I view my job is helping people write Terraform plugins, and part of that is teaching them what they need to know. I think the question, correct me if I'm wrong here, was what kind of viewpoints should we be getting as we develop this documentation? Who should we be talking to? Who should be writing the documentation? And I think my my hot take. This is an off the cuff hot take, so disclaimers apply. I do think that you want the documentation structured by the experts. And the reason I say want it structured by the experts is because in education theory, we talk about something called scaffolding, and the theory of education that people learn when you give them framework and structure to slot ideas into. And if you just throw ideas and concepts at random at people, they have no way to piece them together and build a cohesive picture out of it and like a coherent picture out of it. And so I think you want people who have that coherent picture in their head already, creating the structure of the documentation and kind of building out the framework of it, if you will. But I do think that contributions from everybody across the experience level of usage or of that knowledge, I think you want them to be able to contribute to that. I think you want them to be able to kind of fill in the meat of it, if you will, because they know they've got the most visceral exposure to the problems that the documentation is trying to help them solve and the experience of using the tools. And the experience of learning the concepts for the first time. And so if they can help to add the meat and kind of give the details and build out the documentation in that way, I think that's awesome. The one thing I will say is one of the most helpful things for me in kind of figuring out how provider developers struggle was watching a provider developer live stream building a provider, because the visceral experience of watching somebody who is learning live in front of you really kind of helps highlight where the gaps in your process and your documentation and your tooling are. And so I think those are kind of my nebulous swirling thoughts on documentations. I do think that you need to have people who conceptually can see the whole picture to kind of lay out the basis of the documentation. I do think that it is a whole community effort to build out the details of the documentation. I do think you want to be talking to, in conversation with, and getting feedback loops from people who are brand new, people who are in the middle of their journey, and people who are experts to make sure that the documentation is serving all their needs. And I do think that one of the tools that I want to reach for more and more is getting to kind of watch people, or getting to get that kind of high bandwidth information about what learning to develop a Terraform provider is like. Because on our team, we've got a wealth of knowledge. Brian was the engineering lead for the AWS team, which is millions of lines of provider code, millions of downloads, powers just so much of the world's economy. I was the engineering lead for the Terraform Google provider before I came to this role. And Katie, who's not on this call, manages a lot of our standard library providers, like our time and our random and our DNS providers and stuff like that are used by so many people. They're some of our most used Terraform providers. So we've all kind of got that experience of being Terraform provider developers ourselves, but all of us learned to be Terraform provider developers years ago. And so some of the details have faded or have changed on us. And so I think constantly leaning on others for re-upping and refreshing what that experience looks like in our minds is something that I'd like to do more of in the future. And is kind of what I'm hoping some of these things like these office hours and the Discuss forum and stuff like that can help offer us, is to kind of keep us in tune with what new Terraform provider developers and even intermediate Terraform provider developers are struggling with as they try and, extend Terraform's reach. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I kind of have a follow-up for you. It's related enough. It's more just on your view, especially since you mentioned your education background. For both of you, for like the newer people, they're going to go in and write that plugin and they take the journey, they get to the end. How do you, when you move to that documentation, overcome that sort of bias one can get when you're like, I don't need to document this part, because not because you're like, you don't think it's important, but because it's become so simple to you and so straightforward that you neglect to add that. How do you guys, having done this, overcome that to make sure that what needs to be in there is in there?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that worked for me personally was when I was first coming into my role here at this company, and working on Terraform provider development full time was, one, kind of as Patty is alluding to, making sure that we think about that experience of somebody who's not, necessarily well versed or experienced or knowledgeable in Terraform or the service provider in this case. Sometimes you can lose a lot of details, and gloss over things if you're just well experienced in something, but forget the kind of basic setup, kind of, if you will, of how to get started. And I think it's definitely a struggle, right? We want to be kind of concise with our documentation and make sure that folks are concise with it, but also it needs to be approachable. And if it's not approachable, you can lose so much of your audience from that. And in the end, it's just, if you're writing a provider that's really only meant to benefit you, that's your own prerogative. But, really, I think what a lot of people have strived for and what we've kind of designed in the Terraform ecosystem is this kind of environment of collaboration, right? We have the Terraform registry to publish public modules and public, providers. And even with Terraform, the commercial offerings for Terraform, there's now private registries and those sorts of things kind of encourage that. This is not just for me or my own personal benefit. This is for anybody who has access to this, their benefit. And I guess it's taking your hat off for a second and saying, what am I really doing this for, right? And it's always just it's so fun to think about how many people benefit from when you write that piece of code and then ship it somewhere. And really, how does that become successful? And it's through the documentation, because that's where everybody will start.
I like that approachability. I've never heard that used for documentation, oddly enough, and maybe that's why we have so many problems with it. But Patty, if you will.
I think I agree with Brian. The only other thing I'll add is we're blessed with a large ecosystem and a large community, and that to an extent keeps us honest. I always knew if I published something without documentation, someone would end up in my issues sooner rather than later, being like, how do I do this? Or in the forum asking, how do I do this? A lot of the best practices on terraform.io, for example, were created because, I heard something 3 times in a row and was like, okay, we need to write this down somewhere. That's not in the heads of our team here on the Plugin SDK team. But yeah, I think it's I think to a certain amount it's the accountability of knowing that people know where to find us and ask us questions and do things, and that if you're going to properly support the community, part of your job is not just answering those questions there, but preventing them from needing to be asked again. Back when all of this was happening in the HashiCorp Terraform repo, and that's where all provider development and Terraform core development all happened in that one repo, and the issue tracker for all of them were mixed together in that one repo. I think we learned very quickly that we were going to get repeats if we just solved things by telling people in the issue comments what to do or what the best case was. And if that's where our documentation lived, it was not findable. I did really love Brian's point though about approachability. We actually debated this on the Plugin SDK team, concretely just, I don't know, a few months ago, Brian, where we wrote documentation in it. I was like, we should link out to terraform.io for this, because if we put too much in the Go doc here, in the documentation that is in the Go code that your editor will surface and that the Go documentation site will surface, if we put too much in there, I've seen provider developers scroll right past it because it's 4 paragraphs. And I'm not reading all of this. Get me to the part I need to know. But Brian was like, but if we just toss a link in there, they're not going to go look at that. We need to put the information. This is information they need to know. And so it needs to be in that real estate. And so finding the balance of that is hard, of not just what to document or who should document, but where it should be documented, because, it's hard to the goal is always to have provider developers having information they need at their fingertips, whatever they're doing. But people are people, and you're not going to convince somebody to read a small book just because you put it in front of them. You gotta figure out what the right amount of information to surface to them is for that context, and what they really need to know for that context, and then point them to other places to get more information if they need more for whatever they're doing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Great. So from Brian, remembering who it is you're making these things for and why, as well as keeping the idea of approachability on mind. And then Patty, the structure, how you go about putting things where they're put and when to put them in, as well as letting your community drive what parts of the documentation need to be improved. Yeah, it would keep you honest without letting that, hey, I know this, why should I go into it? It keeps you honest with that mindset. So I really like that.
Yeah, I think Patty actually brought up a kind of really good point there as well about, when we were talking about the Go code itself and documenting inside of there, that also kind of helps us, just in general, decide, oh, is this functionality too complex in this one thing? Should we split it up? Should we do, take a different approach or different design? It is kind of interesting that, you kind of do that like rubber duck programming, if you will, even just writing the documentation for something. And it's like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Should we approach this differently? So kind of interesting in that regard too.
Yeah, if you can't explain it in the documentation, how's somebody supposed to understand it? But also, to your point, we've talked about who we write documentation for. And it's a really unpopular take, but sometimes I write documentation for me because I'm going to have to look at this code in 6 months, and I'm going to have forgotten everything I knew about it by that point. I guarantee it. And I'll be like, why am I doing this? How am I supposed to use this function? What's even going on here? So, I mean, that is also something that keeps me honest when I'm commenting my code or writing documentation is, I know I'm not going to remember that. My brain is not that good with memory, so I leave myself notes around all the places so that I can find them. Because there have definitely been times at 2 a.m. where somebody needs to have an issue resolved immediately, and I'm like, oh, I'm not awake enough to try and trace through Git and figure out why this happened the way it did. And so having those notes there really helps.
I feel like that would be a great premise for a movie, is just the sequence of somebody reading notes in source code and then figuring out what's happening, like amnesia, like I don't know what's going on. It would be fantastic. Or maybe a good hack day project we could work on. It's incredible insights. I did want to shout out to Tracy Holmes, who was in the chat. She wanted me to let you know, both Brian and Patty, hi. So definitely wanted to do you some justice on that front. I did want to, she said, Patty, we can pair in my provider soon. So sounds like it'd be fun. Definitely want to hear how that went. There was one book that's kind of related to some of the points that y'all made as well, and it's called Working in Public. I'm going to go ahead and throw that in the chat. I cannot talk up this book enough of how great it is, because it defines all of the different types of open source projects that exist out there, as well as some meaningful ways to contribute to projects, and like documentation and figuring out ways in which to kind of help out the people administering these applications and these projects, because it's difficult, right? Especially when there are a lot of people that want to contribute to it or create issues for it. There's always issues that will be had, and there's not always people that will be able to fulfill those and actually get the work done. Sometimes it might not make sense where the project's going as well. So definitely recommend checking out that book. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'd love to get those answered for you. I think we have about 11 minutes, but yeah, I'd love to turn it over to you, Cole, if you have any other questions. Otherwise, I think I might have some as well.
If you have some, go for it. I have some as well, but you're the captain.
So I like to ask some questions that make you think. Again, promise not gotcha journalism, but things just to kind of be like, if you had to if you had to classify the Terraform SDK and what it's like to work on the project, kind of like everything about the project itself, if you had to compile that down into a cupcake and a frosting flavor, what would you pick?
I think I would have to give the current SDK kind of like a cookies and cream business. It's got a lot of good things. It's very delicious, but it's also got those little crunchy bits that, may or may not be pleasant sometimes. And frosting, oh geez, I don't know. I think the new framework is going to be like a smooth red velvet cake. That's what I'm thinking right now.
So cookies and cream with a smooth red velvet.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Patty? I personally was going to say I think that I kind of saw it as like a confetti cake base with buttercream frosting, maybe some purple sprinkles on the top there because it is Terraform. But
I think my pick would be for the current SDK. I think it's a vanilla cupcake with vanilla frosting, but just an overwhelmingly massive amount of frosting. And the reason I think that is because I think it started out as something that was meant to be no nonsense and pretty straightforward. And yet over time, it needed to grow and it kind of kept getting more and more ladled on it. And to the point where a lot of it is not solid or stable anymore. And I shouldn't say that. It is solid and stable. It's okay. Nothing's going to break. We're all good. But it's not built on solid or stable abstractions anymore. The code itself is solid and stable. The abstractions it's built on are a little bit more murky and fluffy. And so I think in this analogy, they are made of frosting. They're not cupcakes anymore like they should be. And I think the new SDK is honestly just a vanilla cupcake with vanilla frosting in the right proportions. We weren't trying to reinvent Terraform provider development radically. We were trying to realign to the abstractions of today and surface appropriate abstractions for today so that things that are abstractions are now part of the cupcake instead of the frosting. We're trying to kind of make that transition happen. And hopefully that gives everyone a nicer balance. It may not be the most exciting code you'll ever write. It may not be magical. It may not be glamorous, but it's solid, it's stable, it's there, it works, and nobody's gonna find it offensive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you bring vanilla home, nobody complains.
It's very true.
That's so good. I like the I think I've said in a couple other streams with some other people is I know that there are the programming languages quip where it's there are two types of programming languages, the ones everyone complain about and the ones no one uses, which I also absolutely agree with too. So if somebody's complaining, you're probably doing the right thing. Never hurts to listen to feedback either on that front. Awesome. Wonderful choices. Maybe in the future we'll get those cupcakes sent out to you when some of the provider work gets wrapped up. Awesome. I didn't see any questions in chat, but did want to turn over to you, Cole, if anything has cropped up since, or if you had some insight on cupcake flavors and assembly.
And I really like both analogies. My thing is with the current cupcake steak, I like the crunchy bits and cookies and cream, so I'd be like, gimme. And then for the frosting, I like the frosting. So the analogy for me is like, why are we changing? But in terms of stuff beyond that, no, it's kind of hard to top that with anything tastier. So
awesome. Well, with that, I guess the next question that we have for y'all, Brian, is do you have anything that is newsworthy that's going on currently?
Yeah, great question. So today's actually kind of a very exciting day for our team. We have a few releases going out and pushing the buttons on. So the new Terraform plugin framework, we're actually cutting 0.10 release of that today, hopefully. And, that'll basically make it possible to actually write a provider that can handle CRUD functionality and, get in set state appropriately. So very exciting. Definitely more to come to that project as we get more and more of the existing SDK features baked into 0.20 and further releases. But the basic bones are there, right? We have a good structure that we're building on. So that's very exciting. There's a Terraform Plugin Go release, which is basically the underlying kind of library for a lot of the newer functionality. This handles a lot of the mystical type conversions and all that business. It has a few bug fixes going out in the release today, 0.31. And Terraform Plugin Log is a new library that is coming out. And it's getting a 0.10 release. This is basically we're trying to centralize and make the experience more consistent for logging in Terraform plugins. So the idea here is that you basically go in your provider code and you quote unquote register, if you will, a logging system. And what that'll allow it to do is, one, when it goes back and forth between Terraform, that log output will actually be much more filterable in the future. And also, it also helps allow you to build certain subsystems as well within your logging of your own provider, things that might be going on within your provider. If you want to separate out those logging concerns, you can definitely do that. So that's very exciting. We are very excited about improving the logging there as well. It should be hopefully a little bit clearer.
Exciting. I swear there's nothing like release day, especially when you have many of them that are coming out.
Yeah, and I do want to also probably give a shout out to HashiTalks Build, which is coming up in about a month's time. An awesome conference that I'm sure, Taylor, you can talk much more at length about and have all the right words for, but shout out to the folks interested in running that, because it sounds like it's going to be super neat. So I'll let you take that over.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and post a link here shortly. And there it is. I cannot wait for HashiCorp Build personally. So you might have heard of our HashiTalks events by the DA team. And typically we'll put them on. They'll be regional events, and you'll be able to talk to and about and with practitioners from your region. This HashiTalks is a little bit different in that we'll be talking about what it takes to actually build the things that HashiCorp makes. So whether that be people submitting CFPs to talk about how they created a provider for their team, or a plugin for Waypoint or Vault or Console or whatever it might be, the context is building. And so really fun to kind of hear it like drop down a level and hear about people that are actually working on tools that help create the tools. So if you have an idea for that, if you'd like to submit a CFP, please check out that link. Otherwise, stay tuned, because it should be a pretty fun event. We're working on getting talking with some people, getting talks all lined up right now. So please check that out. Let us know if you have any comments on that front. But I think I did see a question in the chat.
Yeah, looks like we've got a couple. The first one's directed towards our wonderful Patty here. It's around whether or not the new provider framework will support dynamic pseudo type, or will it always need to be with plugin Go?
This is a question I was hoping nobody would ask or try, and we'll find out. But right now, there's nothing technically preventing you from using dynamic pseudotype. I think we need to engage with the question of what that looks like for the framework a little bit more than we have to before we can promise that that'll be in the case in the future. It's going to be ugly. You do need to write more code. You need to define your own specific type for it. That returns a dynamic pseudotype. So there's more work to do than just using any of the other built-in types, but technically nothing in the framework prevents it at this point. Whether we will introduce something that prevents it or not, I can't make any promises around. My general gut feeling is that dynamic pseudotype is a more advanced usage of Terraform's type system, and therefore does justify dropping down to Terraform Plugin Go, which has more advanced utilities for it. But I do like the idea of being able to use it through the framework if that's something that we can offer with abstractions that make sense and will be stable over time for it. It's a very long way of saying maybe.
Nice.
I love that when I'm in a Zoom call and I do the same thing, Patty, and then I'm just like, TLDR, no. That's so funny. Awesome. I'm excited. I have not gotten to work with that yet, and so I'm really stoked to do so. I did see another question that we can kind of wrap things up. Will there be functionality to be able to enable more logging for a specific provider only?
Yeah, that's actually kind of one of the reasons behind this framework. And there's an issue open in the Terraform Plugin SDK repository 695 that goes into the nice lengthy proposal, which is great, length in a good way, about what's working today, what's not working today, where we think we want to go with the logging. And yes, specifically, that is one of the concerns that's trying to be addressed, is the ability to turn on and off more granularly what types of logs are coming from providers or subsystems of providers. So excellent question, and yes.
Awesome. Well, with that, all wonderful things must come to an end. I'm bummed to say that we have run out of time for our community office hours today, but really do want to thank you all for making this a wonderful session. Thank you for tuning in live. If you watch this asynchronously, awesome. Howdy. Please at us if you have any questions. We'd love to carry on these conversations and continue those on with you. As we close things out, would love to quickly popcorn through everybody and see if anyone has any good closing comments, mantras, words of wisdom, anything like that. Would love to start with you, Brian.
Yeah, I think for me, it's invigorating to see how much the Terraform ecosystem has grown and how much everybody who builds things, whether it's, a provider or adding documentation for providers or building Terraform modules, it makes our job like really exciting on our side. And it just, raising tide raises all ships. So thank you everybody for helping kind of build this ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Patty, any words of wisdom from you?
I don't know about wisdom, but I'm super excited about all the things that are coming from the pipeline. I just get so excited about it. Building providers with some of this new tooling is just, I'm so happy about it. I think that everyone on the team has done just an awesome job on it. And I can't wait to share it with all of you. But other than that, I'm going to stick with my traditional happy terraforming.
Thank you so much, Patty. And you really do get to feel that enthusiasm from you, from Brian, just from the whole team. And I feel like we get just, even though it's a small iota of that, while using the tools and building these things out, we actually get to feel a little bit of that infused in the product as well. Cole, do you have any closing words for the group?
Other than thank you so much for taking time, Brian and Patty, and coming out and telling us stuff. I mean, I know myself, just a couple of years ago, I didn't even know there was a difference between a plugin and a provider. I was like, what's, oh, those are the same thing. Okay. But I appreciate it coming on and giving your different insights, especially a lot of the talk around education or documentation and getting that background on education from you, Patty, was very interesting, but also seeing the frontline view that Brian brought from having worked on the AWS provider and seeing the issues from that. Just hearing that advice from someone who's gone that deep into the front lines makes acting on it, that much easier.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining, for having fun with us. My advice to you is it's summer. Take time off if you can, wear some sunscreen, and have some fun outside again, if you can. I know it's the weather is not the same everywhere, and it's getting quite hot in some places. So definitely here, I'll need to remember to turn on the AC and get some sunscreen going. But thank you again, everyone. This is a fantastic